2013, and Ruth Andrus will be running the camera today. And I'm speaking to Morton Rachofsky, who has been on this board and has agreed to interview with us. Hello, Morton.
Hello, Nancy.
I am going to start by asking you the questions, where were you born? Or if you were born here, where your parents were born, and how did they get here? Or perhaps your grandparents are from here too. So tell us about that.
I was born at Baylor Hospital on Gaston Avenue. My father, let his soul rest in peace, was born in Dallas. My mother, Shom, was born in Minsk, Russia in 1898. Came to Omaha, Nebraska at the age of 3. In the early 20s, she came to visit in Dallas. Met my father, Shom, and they were married in November of 1924.
Where was your father's father born?
They came, I was told, from a town called Rachov, R-A-C-H-O-V. And when they came from there, they added the ski to their name. I was telling somebody this at a singles party years ago, and the guy was from Russia, and he said, "That's not true." I said, "That's a story I've always heard." He says, "That's not true." So there is a town of Rachov. I've looked it up on the map, in the Carpathian Mountains, and theoretically that's where they came from. My grandfather, Shom, was a blacksmith. He had Pacific Horseshoeing Company in downtown Dallas, and Herb Shore, Shom, went to an ephemeral art show where they sell paper products, and he bought and gave to me a blank check on Pacific Horseshoeing Company, M. Rachofsky, proprietor, and the date was 191 with a blank, so it was either 1910 to 1919. And I looked for that check to bring today to show you, and I couldn't find it. I know I have it, but anyhow.
1919. When were you born?
When was I born?
Mm-hmm.
Many years ago.
Okay, no comment, right?
No, 1910
Mm-hmm.
was when they had Pacific Horseshoeing Company.
Exactly, but they
And
wrote you a check?
No, this was a bank draft,
I've got it.
not filled in. If you go to one of these paper shows, they have documents and things, and this was in a little plastic envelope.
I see.
And Herb Shom bought it, gave it to me, thought I would like to have it, which I was ecstatic to get it. And my father, Shom, used to go get horses and bring them to the blacksmith shop to be shod. Is that the right word? Shod? Shoot?
Did he make house calls?
Sure, they went to pick up horses, but they bring them into the blacksmith shop.
What street was this on downtown?
The draft says they were on Pacific Avenue. I think Pacific and Field. But they lived at the time on the corner of Caroline and Cedar Springs. And that was in the family up until several years ago.
So
The old homestead.
And that's where you were raised?
Well, that's where the family was. When I was born, we lived at 2909 Grand Avenue, within walking distance of Fair Park. Right around the corner from Kaiser Lumber Company, where the Ringling brother, Barnum and Bailey, would stage their horses and animals before the circus was in town. The circus would go down Grand Avenue on their way to Kaiser Lumber Company's parking lot. And then in 1938, we moved to 2521 South Boulevard. And the whole street was Jewish. The Schwifts were on the corner. Jane Rutland lived next door to them. The Rootbergs lived next door to them. We lived next door to the Rootbergs. On the other side was Max and Lottie Glazier. And on the other side of them was the Goranzics. And across the street was the Blatts. Rita and Marilyn Blatt. Rita now married to Mitchell Rosansky, and Marilyn married to Charlie Krobitz.
Have you kept up with these people over the years?
Saw Marilyn a couple of weeks ago, saw Rita yesterday at a funeral. Yeah, we see each other all the time.
What was it, how old were you when you moved to South?
South Boulevard?
Yeah,
It was in 1938.
so you were basically not raised in South on Grand.
Right, I left there as a baby and we moved to South Boulevard. My three sisters and I all went to John Henry Brown on Grand Avenue. We all attended Forest Avenue High School on what is now Martin Luther King Boulevard. We all graduated from there, and right around the corner from us was the Tifereth Israel Synagogue on Grand Avenue, where all three of my sisters were married.
So you were raised in a religious household?
We were. We kept kosher and observed all the holidays. And we all went to Sunday school at Shereth Israel because there wasn't a Sunday school at Tifereth at the time. I was bar mitzvahed at Tifereth Israel. Went to Hebrew school at Agudath Sachem. And was in the Boy Scouts at Temple Emmanuel, because it was the only one that had a scout troop. So we belonged to everything. And we went to the Jewish Community Center on Pocahontas.
I don't know Pocahontas.
Pocahontas is just south of downtown Dallas. That's where Shereth Israel was. The community center was a couple blocks away. And the freeway, R.L. Thornton, that came through that area, took out Shereth Israel's property.
The town was big enough at that time to carry 3 places of worship?
That's what we had, Shereth, Tifereth, and the temple. And we were all basically in South Dallas. And then after the war, I guess even before World War II, the migration started to North Dallas. And a lot of the people moved to Park Cities and beyond. And then we left, we were one of the last families to leave South Dallas, and that was in 1955. And by that time, we had minorities living just about in every house around us.
What, did you meet with any anti-Semitism growing up? It sounds like you were surrounded by Jews.
During the major Jewish holidays, the high school was basically empty because it was so heavily predominant Jewish. But I don't remember anything, any anti-Semitic actions that I recall to this day. There may have been some that I didn't know about.
Well, the interesting thing is that when I interview people from your area, some met with it all the time, some ran home from school, and some didn't at all.
Yeah, Aaron Spelling has said that he was harassed and used to tell the people beating him up stories to get them interested and stop the assault. He lived on Gould Street, which is between Irving and Akron, just south of downtown. It just takes a few bad people to create those things. I guess if there was any, I don't remember it. I mean, you still didn't join the Dallas Country Club. I mean, that's been forever. But I don't know that, in a way that's anti-Semitic, in a way it's their choice.
Where did you go to college?
I attended Texas A&M for 4 years. And when I graduated, my rich uncle gave me 3 choices: June, July, or August. I picked August. A couple of months later, I got an all-expense trip to the Oregon. He fed me, clothed me, housed me, and gave me all the bullets I could shoot. And I spent 13 months in Korea.
As a civilian in Korea?
as a field artillery officer. I was a forward observer. I was later aide to General Horace Harding, class of 1917, West Point. He was Division Artillery Commander of the 40th Division, and I was his aide. And then I went on the staff of the 40th Division Artillery. Came home, went to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania, got my MBA from Morton, came back, several jobs later, ended up in real estate, and went on my own. I went with Miller Beer in '59, and went on my own in '64, and have been there ever since. Figured up today, that was 49 years ago.
Wow.
And I've been on the Real Estate Advisory Committee of the Federation, DISD, the Texas A&M Foundation. I served on the board of directors of the Dallas Board of Realtors. I was vice chairman of the Commercial Investment Division. And in 1964, I got the Eisesmer Award.
Which is?
Young Leadership. And then I've been practicing sculpture in my spare time, now more full-time, to the point in 1983 I was a founding president of the Texas Sculpture Association. And a couple of years ago, on our 25th anniversary, I was the instigator of a big celebration that we had for our 25th anniversary in '08. We had a program at the Nasher, and brought in some outside speakers and got a lot of press out of it.
Were you artistically inclined as a child?
The first piece of art I remember doing was etching a copper plate in grade school, where you paint a design on a copper plate, put it in acid, let it eat away the background. Still have that plate.
And you moved on from there, obviously.
I've always tinkered, but making a living as an artist is very difficult. And so I've stuck with real estate to support my habit. And now I'm doing more and more of it. And I've had 3 salons at the Motti Museum on Bowen and Carlisle. One of them was filmed by a young man who was very good at it. Max did a great job. And there's a piece of my work in front of the Motti. Dorothy Masterson came to my house and said, "I like that piece in your front yard." I said, "I'll make you a duplicate." She said, "Well, we don't have any money." I said, "I can relate to that. I don't have any money either." So she found some money, long story short, made her a duplicate, and it's in front of the Motti now. I also have a piece at the Below Mansion on Ross Avenue. When they expanded and built the addition of their building, there was a glass atrium connecting the two, and they wanted the sculpture to go in that area. I made a copy of one of my pieces for them. It's there now. It's a 16-foot tall stainless steel geometric sculpture.
How do you move those things from where you've crafted them to through locations?
Very carefully. I design and build wooden maquettes. When I get a sale, I have them made at various fabricators that have the equipment, the manpower, and the knowledge. I can weld 2 pieces of metal together, but it won't look very pretty. And so I yield to the craftsmen. They've got the equipment and the manpower and the knowledge to do it. So I let them do it. And I have a piece at Chaparral Steel in Midlothian that they commissioned me to do. And they insisted that I use their material because they're like commercial metals. They reprocess metal. And so we use their metal, but I had my fabricators in Dallas do it.
It was my mistake that I didn't bring some photos of your pieces. Can you describe them? I can, but I'd like you to. What they all have in common, what they're made out of.
The best way to describe my work is I do things that can be done small and multiples and be children's toys. The same design can be done larger outside and be monumental sculpture. So if you're familiar with the child's Jack, I've taken that design and made it three-dimensional and blown it up and made them in different sizes where they stack one on top of the other, and they're self-supporting. And I've done variations of that, and I don't know if you're familiar with the Soma Puzzle. It's 7 pieces that go together to form a cube. It's a Swiss invention years ago. I had nothing to do with its creating, but it's 7 interesting parts. And I have made those parts out of wood and wrapped them with vinyl tape diagonally to where each surface it touches another matches color-wise. So they're easy to put together puzzles, but if you don't know what you're doing, they can be mind-breaking. Go ahead.
Are the small models for sale as well? The children's toys for sale as well?
They are. Unfortunately, my costs are so heavy. When I do the work, this one I just finished, it's going to be in the Mary Thomas Gallery, February 23rd. It's about 14 inches all around. In the wood, the vinyl tape, and none of my time, just the vinyl and the wood are very expensive. So they really can't be done as toys. I'm trying to figure out a way to get them manufactured, but the problem is you have to make a lot of them to get the cost down. And to make a lot of them, you have to spend a lot of money. And you have to be sure they're going to sell. And you're up against the toy industry.
Are you a mentor to anybody? There's a lot of young budding artists in this community.
We tried to do that with the Texas Sculpture Association. When we started, we decided there'd be no bars to membership. Anyone that wanted to join could join. And we would have open shows where everybody could bring a piece, and we would have jury shows. And we had jury shows at North Park, Plaza of the Americas, and those that are starting out, that are just beginners, have as much crack at getting in a show as anyone else, especially the open shows. And they get, it's not a direct mentoring situation, but it is an atmosphere where they can come and be with other artists. And we're having programs now periodically, educational programs. So yeah, it's a great group for mentoring, and this year we're celebrating our 30th anniversary. And they're not going to do as big a deal as we had for the 25th, and they asked me for my approval, and I said, y'all are in charge, do whatever you want. I spent 3 years helping put the 25th together, and
you paid your dues.
over and over. Was that a cough or a sneeze?
And you must have some mentors. Who are yours?
I took a class from Octavio Medellin when the DMA was in Fair Park. And are you familiar with the gold background in Temple Emmanuel's main sanctuary? Octavio fired those tiles and installed them all, each one at a different angle to give it the look of flame. And I spent a semester with him. I took a semester with James Searles in night school when he was at SMU. And
I didn't know he was at SMU.
He was at night school teaching then. And I think he may have done day too, but I took a night school course with him.
What was the year on this one?
Hmm?
What was the year on this one?
It was probably in the late 70s. And James has done quite well.
Yes.
He had a show at Gerald Peters' gallery of his work, and I approached him and I said, James, remember when I was in your class, you hit a couple licks on my boat arc log I was working on. Would you mind coming over and putting your name where you hit it a couple licks, you know, to increase its value? And he took the bait. He says, I don't put my name on any sculpture, because if anybody ever gets hurt on a piece of my sculpture, I'll deny that I had anything to do with it. I mean, I was kidding and he was kidding, but no, he's a good guy. He's done very well. He and George Tobolowsky are very close.
Tell me a little bit about your father, because he's quite a name in this city, and we don't have an interview of him.
You have a verbal,
Mm-hmm.
Ginger Chesney did a verbal with him. You have that. He was born in 1900. He attended Cumberland Hill School, which is now Sedco on Acker Street and Woodall Rogers. He ended up working at Sanger Brothers on Lamar Street, and some of the employees were unhappy, and he took their complaints to management, and as a result, they told him he could leave. So he left the employee of Sanger Brothers. Somehow he fell in with R.L. Thornton, State Bank and Trust, which later became the Mercantile. And he and Fred Florence were the two main Jewish bankers in Dallas for a long time. Morton Benno was R.L. Thornton's right-hand man, but he was more of a PR man. Did you know him? He really wasn't a banker, but he rose through the ranks and became senior executive vice president before he retired. And he was involved in the creation of Golden Acres. He was an air raid warden in World War II. And
Really?
I still have his certificate. And he was very active at Tefereth. He was president from 1940 to 41. And after he passed away, so many people came to me and said, you don't know this, but I went to the Mercantile for money, and your father took me down to the teller, and I got money, and I paid it back, and I came back again and again. And finally, I came for a larger amount, and he said to them, it's time you start borrowing direct from the bank. Apparently, they didn't qualify, so he was covering them. And he would tell a lot of stories, but when we asked who that was, he would say, Mr. X, because you can't break confidences. But a lot of people would apply for loans, and he would take them to the loan committee, and they would say, he's got nothing. He's got no collateral, no background. I know his family, they belong to Tefereth Israel, they're all right. And a lot of people got loans from the Mercantile that they couldn't get elsewhere.
You should know that a lot of people know that about your father.
Well, thank you. He would not want me bragging on him because he was very non-vocal about all these things. I mean, he did them, he was involved in them, but he didn't wear it on his chest. He was active in the Variety Club. He was Dough Guy, which is their name for the treasurer, for a long time. And met some very interesting people through that. And he was one of the few Jews involved in the Variety Club. He was also an elk. And 33rd degree Mason. And in the early days of Dallas, he played poker with a lot of the city people. And some of them were members of a group called KKK. And
Did he know that at the time?
back in those days, well, it was a friendly group. They were an organization. And but he learned his way around City Hall, and he did a lot of things for the bank in relation to the city. And when I was in college, one weekend up here, I got a call Sunday morning. One of my friends called, he was in jail. And I asked my father to help me go down there and get him out. He wouldn't do it. So I said, what if it was me in jail and I called you Sunday morning to get out? What would you do? He says, you could rot. I would not get you out of jail. So I remembered that my friend was a Mason. And I told him that, and he said, let's go. So we went down to City Hall on Harwood Street. And the officer said, are you a bail bondsman? He says, no. He said, well, you can't make his bond. He said, yes, I can. I'm a fee holder in the city of Dallas, and I can make his bond. This was okay. So we got him out.
How did he get in? How did he land there in jail?
The two of them had dates. I think it was a football weekend up here, and the two of them had dates. They took him home, and they were on Main Street, and the driver was a little intoxicated and got pulled over. And he said, where are you going? He said, I'm looking for the Adolphus Hotel. He said, well, it's a block away. And they said, we better drive you in. So they arrested both of them, unbeknownst to each other. So when he came down, first person came down, we asked where the other one was. He said, I don't know. He said, I went to sleep in the back seat and I woke up, a policeman was driving. This particular man later became an attorney and a judge in South Texas. And so we asked for the other person. He said, yeah, he's here. So we got him. He got off the elevator with a bottle of VAT 69 in his hand. We said, what's this? And they said, whatever they bring in here, we give them when they leave. So anyhow, there were a lot of people that were good friends of the family, and I always felt, Jew and Gentile alike. We had a lot of friends. And what else can I say?
You're saying it. What is the most fun thing you did as a youngster? Hobby, sport?
I built model airplanes like those kids at that age did. And was moderately involved in the Boy Scouts. Scouts were not a big thing at that time. Maurice Beck was our scoutmaster at Temple. And A&M pretty well controlled 4 years of my life. And we marched in parades in Fort Worth, Houston, Austin, Dallas. And then for 10 years I was in uniform because I was in ROTC at high school for 4 years, A&M for 4 years, and the Army for 2 years. So at the end of 10 years I didn't have any clothes, any civilian clothes. But I bought some to go to Wharton. And anyhow,
Do you get to travel much? Because I would think you would because of your art. And
I have traveled in the past. My sister in Houston was going on a tour with a group to Israel. They got me to join the group. And her husband, let his soul rest in peace, got a business conflict and backed out. Long story short, I decided to go on my own. And talked to Bart Bernstein, who had been there. He says, piece of cake. In fact, he met his wife on a bus. And I was going, and we always got together for their anniversary. And I was talking to my brother-in-law in Harlingen. And I said, why don't you let your wife go to Israel with me? He said, okay, I'll talk to her, call tonight. So, long story short, we all met in Houston for the anniversary. Then Helen and I got on a plane and went to Israel for 2 weeks. All we had was our ticket and a plane hotel reservation the first night. And we just faked it after that and just had a ball. Went up to Golan Heights and we got a guide that some friends had recommended, and spent the night in a kibbutz, and it was a great trip. Later I went on a cruise with my older sister, Scandinavian cruise, and I think a year or two later I took my 16-year-old nephew, who, because my father had broken his hip, missed out on a Christmas trip. And I said, I'll go to Europe with you. Long story short, he and I went on that same cruise and then went to Paris, where he had a great uncle and great aunt, and just had a ball. So I've been about halfway around the world, halfway one way, or a quarter one way and a quarter the other. I haven't gone all the way around yet.
So it's mainly the art in America that's influenced your sculpture.
Well, I've been exposed to a lot through pictures, magazines, and whatnot. And for several years, International Sculpture Center out of New Jersey had conferences. And they brought in people. Christo was there one year, and they brought in all sorts of people to lecture and show their wares. So I've been exposed. I mean, it's better to see the real thing, but the Nasher's been real great for Dallas, and Ray was real good for the TSA. He let us go to North Park, and he juried a show we had at Plaza of the Americas. I called Robert Miller at the Morning News, and I told him I had 2 pieces juried in the show at TSA, the Plaza of the Americas. I don't know if you know Robert Miller. He said, so what? I said, it's a big deal. He said, so what? You got 2 pieces in a show. And I said, well, Ray Nasher was one of the jurors. He said, oh, wait a minute, let me get a pencil. And he wrote a very beautiful write-up about TSA's show and about who the juror was and that I was in it. So, got a slow news day there. We got some good press for TSA. And then Ray gave me a blue ribbon for one of my pieces at North Park. And I let it hang on the piece, and when I went to pick up the piece, the blue ribbon was gone.
I hope you asked for another one.
I somehow managed to survive without it.
I see. Morton, is there anything I've left out that you'd like to add?
I think you've been very thorough, Nancy, and I'm sure I'll think of some things tomorrow or the next day that I should have said.
Well, please call us. We have some film left.
How long do these interviews normally run?
This is good.
This is about it?
It was a good interview.
I became a master mason right after I graduated from A&M. And I don't know if you know about masonry, but nothing is in writing. All the ritual is passed on verbally. And they paired me up with a man, Arledge Brashers, let his soul rest in peace, who lived in Oak Cliff. He had a brilliant mind. He was a clerk with Railway Express. But he taught many people the rituals that we had to memorize. And I went to his house the summer before I went in the Army, or actually the summer before I went overseas. And he taught me the work. And he said, I went to Europe in World War I. And most of the guys on the ship that said, I know I'm not coming home, most of those guys got killed. And those that went over and said, I'm going to go over, I'm going to do this deal, I'm coming home, most of them came back. So this was his way of teaching me positive mental attitude. And he instilled that in me, along with teaching me the Masonic work. And I guess that's the first time you asked about mentors. This was the first true lesson I had in positive mental attitude. Since then, I've read the books by Napoleon Hill and Clement Stone and all those, but Mr. Brashers gave it to me with that lesson on the ship going over there. And the whole time I was in Korea, and I wasn't in harm's way very often, but when I was, I just was very relaxed about it because I knew I was coming home. And that was many years ago, and it stuck with me, and I have that basic attitude today. Everything's going to be good, and it's all good.